Imagine being captured as a prisoner of war, stripped of everything you own, and thrown into a camp with thousands of other prisoners. No government, no banks, no official currency. Yet, within weeks, a sophisticated economy emerges from nothing, complete with exchange rates, inflation, banking services, and even financial speculation. This isn't fiction. It actually happened in prisoner of war camps across Europe during World War II, and the currency that made it all possible was something you could literally smoke. The story I'm about to tell you isn't just a fascinating piece of World War II history. It's a masterclass in how money actually works, why certain things become valuable, and what happens when humans are left to their own devices to create an economy from scratch. By the end of this video, you'll understand more about the fundamental nature of money than most people learn in a lifetime, and you'll see striking parallels between a POW camp in 1943 and the cryptocurrency markets of today. Our story begins with a young British economist named R.A. Radford, who found himself captured by German forces in Italy in 1943. But instead of just trying to survive his imprisonment, Radford did something remarkable. He observed and documented the spontaneous economic system that emerged around him. His detailed notes would later become one of the most important economic studies of the 20th century, proving that the principles of economics aren't just academic theories, but fundamental aspects of human nature. When Radford arrived at his prisoner of war camp, he expected chaos. Thousands of men from different countries, speaking different languages, with no common authority except their German captors, who had no interest in facilitating trade between prisoners. The Red Cross would deliver care packages containing food, clothing, and various supplies, but the distribution was often random and uneven. Some prisoners might receive chocolate they didn't want, while others got cigarettes they didn't smoke. Others might get clothing that didn't fit or books they couldn't read. Initially, prisoners tried simple bartering. A non-smoker might trade his cigarettes for extra chocolate. Someone who received boots that were too small might swap them for a better-fitting pair. But barter has inherent problems that humans have struggled with for thousands of years. It requires what economists call a double coincidence of wants. You need to find someone who has what you want and wants what you have. If you want chocolate and have cigarettes, you need to find someone who wants cigarettes and has chocolate. If that person wants coffee instead, no deal. But here's where it gets fascinating. Within just a few weeks of Radford's arrival, something extraordinary began to happen. Instead of continuing to barter goods directly, prisoners started using cigarettes as an intermediate step. Even non-smokers would accept cigarettes in trade, not because they planned to smoke them, but because they knew they could easily trade those cigarettes for something they actually wanted later. This is exactly how money evolved throughout human history, and the prisoners were unconsciously recreating thousands of years of economic evolution in a matter of weeks. They were discovering what economists call the functions of money: a medium of exchange, a store of value, and a unit of account. Why cigarettes? Why not chocolate or coffee or any of the other goods floating around the camp? The answer reveals the fundamental characteristics that make something good money. Principles that apply whether we're talking about gold, dollars, or Bitcoin. First, cigarettes were durable. Unlike chocolate, which could melt or spoil, or bread, which would go stale, cigarettes could be stored for long periods without deteriorating. Second, they were divisible. You could break open a pack and trade individual cigarettes for smaller items, or trade entire packs for larger ones. Third, they were portable. A significant amount of value could be carried easily in your pocket. Fourth, they were recognizable. Every prisoner could immediately identify a cigarette and assess its quality. But perhaps most importantly, cigarettes had what economists call intrinsic value. Even if the monetary system collapsed completely, cigarettes still had value to smokers. This gave everyone confidence that they were accepting something of real worth, not just a piece of paper or a promise. The adoption of cigarettes as currency happened organically, without any central authority decreeing it. No committee met to decide that cigarettes would be the official camp currency. Instead, it emerged naturally as prisoners discovered that cigarettes were simply the most convenient and reliable medium of exchange available to them. Convenience drove adoption. Every prisoner already had cigarettes, making trades fast and frictionless. Once cigarettes became widely accepted as currency, something remarkable happened. The camp economy became incredibly sophisticated, practically overnight. Radford documented the emergence of what he called exchange rates between cigarettes and other goods. A bar of chocolate might trade for 4 cigarettes on a typical day. A cup of coffee might cost 2 cigarettes. These rates were surprisingly stable and were known throughout the camp. But here's where it gets really interesting. Just like in any modern economy, these exchange rates would fluctuate based on supply and demand. When Red Cross packages arrived with extra chocolate, the price of chocolate in cigarettes would fall. When rumors spread that cigarette shipments were delayed, everything else would become cheaper in cigarette terms. Essentially, the cigarette was becoming more valuable, creating deflation. Radford observed seasonal patterns too. Before major holidays, when prisoners expected to receive special packages from home, the cigarette prices of luxury goods would rise in anticipation. After packages arrived, prices would crash. The prisoners had essentially created a futures market, with prices reflecting not just current supply and demand, but expectations about future supply and demand. Some prisoners became professional traders, buying goods when prices were low and selling when they were high. They would position themselves near the areas where new prisoners arrived, or where Red Cross packages were distributed, always ready to make a deal. These entrepreneurs were providing a genuine service. They were helping goods flow to the people who valued them most highly, and they smoothed out price fluctuations by buying when supply was high and selling when it was low. But the most extraordinary development was the emergence of banking services. Some prisoners, particularly those who were non-smokers, began to accumulate large stores of cigarettes. Rather than letting them sit idle, these cigarette capitalists began making loans to other prisoners, charging interest in the form of additional cigarettes to be repaid later. A prisoner might borrow 20 cigarettes on Monday, promising to repay 22 cigarettes when his Red Cross package arrived on Friday. The 2 extra cigarettes were interest, compensation for the risk and the time value of money. The borrower got immediate access to goods he needed, while the lender earned a return on his cigarettes. These banks even began offering what we would recognize today as checking accounts. A prisoner might deposit cigarettes with a trusted banker, who would keep detailed records of the account balance. The depositor could then write checks, essentially IOUs backed by the banker, which other prisoners would accept because they trusted the banker's reputation and solvency. The most successful of these prison bankers was a man who had been a professional banker before the war. He understood concepts like fractional reserve banking and leverage. He would keep some cigarettes in reserve to meet withdrawal demands, but lend out the majority of his deposits, earning interest on the loans while paying a smaller amount of interest to his depositors. The difference was his profit. This primitive banking system provided enormous benefits to the camp economy. It allowed cigarettes to be stored safely, facilitated complex transactions, and most importantly, it increased what economists call the velocity of money, how quickly money circulates through an economy. The same cigarettes could facilitate many more transactions when they were in the banking system than when they were hidden under someone's mattress. But even this sophisticated system faced the same challenges that plague modern economies. The cigarette money supply was entirely dependent on outside deliveries from the Red Cross and care packages from home. When shipments were delayed, deflation would set in as cigarettes became scarce and valuable. Prices of everything else would fall in cigarette terms, but this also meant that people would hoard cigarettes rather than spend them, slowing economic activity. Conversely, when large shipments of cigarettes arrived, inflation would result. Suddenly, there were more cigarettes chasing the same amount of chocolate, coffee, and other goods, so prices would rise. Radford documented periods where a bar of chocolate that had cost 4 cigarettes would suddenly cost 6 or 7 cigarettes after a large delivery. The prison economy even developed what amounted to a central bank. In some camps, a committee of senior prisoners would manage communal cigarette supplies, trying to smooth out these fluctuations by releasing cigarettes into circulation during shortages and withdrawing them during gluts. They were conducting primitive monetary policy, trying to maintain price stability in their cigarette economy. But this system had an inherent vulnerability that would eventually prove fatal. Unlike gold or modern fiat currencies, cigarettes had one unique characteristic: they could be consumed. Every time someone smoked a cigarette, they were literally reducing the money supply. It would be like someone eating a $20 bill. This created a constant tension between the cigarette's role as money and their role as a consumer good. When stress levels were high in the camp, more people would smoke, reducing the money supply and creating deflation. When cigarettes were scarce and expensive, even heavy smokers might quit smoking to preserve their wealth, essentially choosing money over immediate gratification. Some enterprising prisoners tried to solve this problem by creating what we might recognize as a gold standard for cigarettes. They would deposit cigarettes with a trusted party and issue paper IOUs backed by those cigarettes. These IOUs could circulate as money, while the underlying cigarettes remained unsmoked. It was a primitive form of representative money, backed by cigarettes just as the dollar was once backed by gold. This system worked well until someone discovered that some of the backing cigarettes had been secretly smoked by the supposed custodian. The resulting crisis of confidence caused a run on cigarette banks, with everyone trying to redeem their paper IOUs for real cigarettes simultaneously. It was a bank run, a currency crisis, and a lesson in the importance of trust in any monetary system, all playing out in a prisoner of war camp in 1943. The parallels to modern monetary crises are striking. Just as depositors rushed to withdraw gold from banks during the Great Depression, or as investors fled certain currencies during the Asian financial crisis, the prisoners learned that confidence is the bedrock of any monetary system. When that confidence is shaken, even the most sophisticated financial structures can collapse overnight. Perhaps most remarkably, different camps developed different monetary systems, leading to exchange rates between camps when prisoners were transferred. A cigarette in Camp A might be worth 1.2 cigarettes in Camp B, reflecting different supply conditions, different prisoner populations, and different levels of economic sophistication. Prisoners who were transferred between camps could profit from these arbitrage opportunities, just like modern currency traders. The cigarette standard finally collapsed toward the end of the war, but not because of any inherent flaw in the system. As Allied victory became inevitable and prisoner exchanges began, the entire premise of the camp economy changed. Prisoners began to focus on their impending liberation rather than trading chocolate for cigarettes. The future value of cigarettes became uncertain. Would they be worth anything in post-war society? The same forward-looking behavior that had made the cigarette economy sophisticated eventually made it irrelevant. But the lessons from this remarkable economic experiment remain profoundly relevant today. The cigarette economy demonstrated that money doesn't need government backing to work. It just needs widespread acceptance and trust. It showed that humans will naturally create sophisticated financial institutions even under the most adverse circumstances. And it proved that the same economic principles that govern Wall Street also governed a prisoner of war camp. In many ways, the cigarette standard was more robust than modern fiat currencies. It had intrinsic value, it couldn't be inflated at will by authorities, and it required no complex legal framework to enforce. Yet, it also had unique vulnerabilities that ultimately made it impractical for long-term use. These lessons are particularly relevant as we watch the development of cryptocurrencies and other alternative monetary systems today. Like cigarettes in the prison camps, Bitcoin and other cryptocurrencies are emerging as money without government backing. They're being adopted not because any authority has decreed their use, but because people find them useful and trustworthy for certain purposes. The prisoners in Radford's camp would have understood the appeal of a currency that couldn't be debased by outside authorities, that could be transferred without intermediaries, and that had a predictable supply schedule. They experienced firsthand how economic uncertainty could make alternative currencies attractive, and how monetary innovation could emerge from the most unlikely circumstances. As we face our own era of monetary uncertainty, inflation, and currency experimentation, the cigarette economy reminds us that money is ultimately a social technology. It works because we collectively agree it works. The prisoners of World War II prove that humans are remarkably adaptable economic creatures, capable of creating sophisticated monetary systems under the most challenging circumstances. Their experience suggests that whatever monetary challenges the future holds, human ingenuity and economic instinct will find a way to create solutions. Whether those solutions involve cigarettes, gold, government currency, or technologies we haven't yet imagined. The next time you hear debates about what makes good money, or whether alternative currencies can really work, remember the cigarettes of World War II. Sometimes the most important economic insights come not from textbooks or trading floors, but from ordinary people doing extraordinary things under extraordinary circumstances.